This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
What's going on, guys? Happy Wednesday to you. Ira Winderman on the scene in Atlanta, getting set to head out to Heat shoot around, but we got an hour to sit here and discuss the Miami Heat. Also, maybe take your questions and just see where this team is right now as we head into this. It's not really the second half of the season per se yet, but I guess mathematically we're pretty close. And Ira, I want to start with what we were talking about in the crossover. And, the fact that we have these guys out there, and yet Eric Spoelstra saying, no, don't get ahead of yourselves. What's your feeling? What's your take being around the team on where we're at right now? Just kind of elaborate on guys like Victor Oladipo, Dwayne Dedmon. You mentioned Jimmy Butler, that kind of a surprise that he's not traveling, but could easily be that, hey, they're coming back home after this. Just kind of give us a rundown here on what we're getting officially versus maybe what the vibe is that you're getting around the team.
I guess I'll sort of go backwards and go from the back end of the roster. I'm going to start with the 10-day emergency guys. As you know, they re-signed Kyle Guy and they re-signed Chris Silva to emergency 10-day deals. They did that because Marcus Garrett is returning from protocols and because Markieff Morris, shockingly, the next guy in line, is in protocols. As each one of those comes back on the active roster, one of either Kyle Guy or Chris Silva has to be deactivated. I would assume Chris Silva would be deactivated, especially with Dwayne Dedmon also coming back. So you have the 10-day guys. Then you go to the guys who've been injured and where we stand right now. And fortunately, that injured list is getting shorter. The one thing I don't know, Clay, is this. Markieff Morris was out with the whiplash that he sustained in that November 8th run-in with Nikola Jokic, not the Jokic brothers, just Nikola, in that game in Denver. And he had that neck injury. So all of a sudden now the Heat are not listing that injury at all. They're simply saying he's in protocols. There are sometimes they show protocol/injury. Mm-hmm. Is he over the injury? I don't know. Is it an accounting thing? We'll see. Generally, players miss 5 days when they're in protocols, which probably would put him out through Saturday's game against the Sixers. They play tonight here in Atlanta. They play the Hawks in a rematch at FTX on Friday. Then they play the Sixers on Saturday. That's where Markieff Morris stands. They've changed his status. But honestly, Clay, I don't know if he clears protocols if he doesn't go back to whiplash. So I guess we're going to wait and see on that. Dwayne Dedmon traveled. And the fact, and you know this, Clay, when a coach even admits a player is close, that probably means he's closer than close. Because they never want to raise expectations and then dim expectations. Then all of a sudden the questions start. So I think Dwayne Dedmon will play in tonight's game against the Hawks. We probably are going to wind up doing an entire Omar Yurtseven segment. But I'm going to give you a sort of a quick thought on this right here. I think Dwayne comes back as a reserve and will always be a reserve. That's his role. Clay, you know this. Eric Spoelstra likes to keep players in their most comfortable role. So I think what's going to happen is this. Until Bam comes back, Omar Yurtseven starts, Dwayne Dedmon comes off the bench. When Bam Adebayo comes back, Bam Adebayo starts. I think Dwayne Dedmon off the bench, but I'm sure you'll have a 20-minute block for me just to talk about the magic, of Turk Nowitzki and what he's done. The other two.
How have I not heard that yet? How have I not heard?
I've been using it from the get-go, and now he's draining three-pointers, so everything has changed.
I guess I should actually listen to you when you speak now, despite the fact we're doing the show
But you know what? You were so into the chat group there, and as long as they're slamming the like button there.
Yeah, and by the way, guys, if you see me bouncing around a little bit, and I'm trying to give myself some header here, but if you see me bouncing around and things like that, I'm checking the chat. You guys are awesome as always. Please make sure drop your questions, your comments, anything like that right there in the chat. And also hit that like button, smash that like button. That does us a big favor. But any questions you have in the comment section right there, we'll get to them, make this an interactive show. But go ahead. Turk Nowitzki, the next Hall of Famer for the Miami Heat.
Exactly. So that's the Dedmon situation. Bam, I think, is very close. Clay, I've never seen this before. A player has thumb surgery. He came back 3 days after for his workouts after surgery because his lower body was good. He gets texts from Udonis Haslem when they're together. Let's go for a run. So we know he's in shape. And he's actually been shooting in the splint with that splinted right thumb. I don't recall if I've ever seen a player have an extremity injury and use that extremity while casted or splinted and still be working. So Bam is itching to get back. I think next week is.
I was at it. We were at his Christmas giveaway, and the man was taking 3-pointers left-handed. Like he has been. And I actually talked to his mom, and I asked how he's doing it. Well, he wants to get out there. Like, this is so. No, you're exactly right. Like, it's one of those where you want players that you kind of have to save them from themselves on some level, and yet they wouldn't let Bam be out there doing that if there's a risk of re-injury. So yeah, go ahead.
So
it's close. Just it's cool. Yeah. So he's getting closer. So. And you mentioned Jimmy Butler already, that your feeling was that there was a chance he would play tonight, but it seems like they're kind of playing
Jimmy's
the long
out.
game.
Jimmy is out tonight. He did not
that's
travel.
what I mean. But you had thought that there was a chance that he was going to travel and play. He did not.
I'm very surprised, but you know what? I think you err on the side of caution, Clay, number one. And I've said this all along. I thought he might even have played in Phoenix, but I think as long as they stay afloat, and heck, they're moving up the standings. I mean, they're in third place now, half a game out of second, that you buy time. Because you want this season to go into May and hopefully have this season go into June. So you're buying time with Jimmy, especially when he's had a repeat injury. So you have that going on. He's missed a ton of games. He's missed like 17 games already. And I'm going to be honest with you. The Victor Oladipo thing, it's interesting how you mentioned you were out with Bam at his Christmas giveaway. We've seen Bam shooting on the court. We've seen Markieff shooting on the court. I'm just going to be honest here. I think too many times people speculate because they have to check a box. Because if you're going to do the Slomin's Home Security Shield hour every week, you've got to give answers. Well, honestly, in this case, it's almost like Vic is being shielded. And I don't know. I don't know if he's a day away, a week away, a month away, because the Heat have kept him so far out of view. He does not scrimmage. He is not in the 5-on-5 full court work. Eric Spoelstra has this catchphrase of everyone did something. Clay, that could mean you were on the side riding the bike. That could mean you were doing suicides after practice. That could mean you were shooting with one of the shooting instructors or Octavio De La Grana working on dribbling. So I think the real unknown here is Victor Oladipo. And honestly, sometimes I go out there and I want to see what the speculation is, but I don't think anyone has a specific answer on that because the Heat have been really tight-lipped on that. And the reason for that is, another topic here, I didn't send you an advanced schedule what we're talking about, but another topic, Vic fills so many boxes. He's your secondary ball handler. Maybe you don't need Gabe Vincent. He's your secondary creator. All of a sudden, maybe you don't need Caleb Martin as a defender if Vic is out there. So Vic, if he comes back, fills like 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes that I don't think the Heat want anyone, I don't want to say getting upset, that's probably an overstatement, but sort of feeling their turf might be stepped on. Vic is the universal donor. Vic has that blood type. He's a defender. He's a ball handler. He's a shooter. He can be, like Eric Spoelstra says, he can be explosive. He could be ignitable. So I think with Vic, it's such a game changer that I think the Heat almost changed their game also. He remains the unknown. Honestly, I don't know.
Well, and I'm glad you got into that because Dr. Drain asked about that. And we have some other good questions here. We'll get to in a moment. But I want to stay on Vic for a second here because I think the thing that people we're not saying that if and when Victor Oladipo, it's not an if at this point, it's to when Victor Oladipo comes back. Nobody, I don't think in the know is saying, oh, Victor Oladipo is going to come back and be 2018 Victor Oladipo. It's the fact that if he can come back and be 2021 Victor Oladipo before he got hurt, like especially that Lakers game, and it was sad to see him get hurt in that game because like you started to see some of the things, but even the other games leading up to that where he clearly was still getting his footing and getting used to the team. But the things that he brings, even as 2021 Victor Oladipo, if he can do that in 2022 and stay healthy throughout the rest of the season, he does bring that extra ball handler. He does bring that extra facilitator. And a lot of these questions about, and you and I have said this from the beginning, that probably the biggest hole on the Heat roster is a pure backup point guard. Victor Oladipo is not a pure point guard, but he can come in that second unit, and he's more of a ball handler, facilitator type player than Gabe Vincent is. Gabe Vincent is a guy you want to come in and get buckets. That's his strength. He can handle the ball, but so the bottom line here is if and when Victor Oladipo comes back, he checks so many boxes that the Heat need, like that they're lacking. And so I think you're right in that other guys have stepped up and filled those roles. But I want to go back to what you said about Eric Spoelstra's catchphrase and everybody did something. The fact is, this was the first time, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but this was the first time where he said that and Victor Oladipo was included. So at least there is some level of progression, right? We don't know what it is, but at least there's some sort of progression here to where if we're looking for signs that at least he's getting closer, whatever the level of close is, at least there's like a light there that's coming and it's not an oncoming train.
Unless it was a misstatement. And you never know for this reason. Everyone did not do something yesterday, even after Eric said it. Markieff Morris is in protocols. I hope they didn't have a guy test positive and he's running suicides and sprints up and down with those guys. So clearly everyone didn't do something. So maybe that was Eric seeing that 14 of 16 guys did something, and he sort of took us in that direction also. Clay, you know this. There are days we show up and we go to the main practice court and we watch free throws, the end of practice. And there's days, and we all hate this, outside the locker room. Rob Wilson comes in his gruffy way, going outside the locker room, guys. And then you get guys one at a time, and you never see anything they did in practice. Yesterday was an outside the locker room day. For as little as they practiced this year, even when they got a chance yesterday, Eric Spoelstra knew these guys need rest more than they need that 2-hour practice. So they wrapped up relatively quickly. They marched out the guys that we asked for to interview one-on-one after, set up the little podium. We did it that way. So you didn't get the full window. Might see a little bit more today also. But the fact that they didn't travel so many players, unlike they did on the trip, I think they really are looking. Tonight is game 41 of the 82-game schedule. They're sort of looking today as sort of the line that this ends the God, get us off the road schedule.
Yes.
And Clay, something else we certainly can get to later in the show also is, of their final 41 games, 25 are at home. 25 home, 16 road. No one has a split like that in the NBA. So again, I almost think like we're almost getting started. It's almost like what they did in the G League. They had their showcase schedule and you'd position yourself and see who you had. And then all of a sudden the G League said on January 6th, hey, let's start all over again. Everyone's 0-0. The difference is the Heat have a nice buffer, 10 games above 500, and now they move to the real sweet spot of their schedule.
Yeah, and so I think when you mentioned that the best is yet to come, and we really haven't seen this Heat team yet, you're right. And yet I saw all I needed to see the first couple of weeks of the season, and it was basically like, you expect a group of players, especially a group of players that have a lot of new faces and a lot of guys that should need some time to get to know each other. Like, you expect it to be kind of a slow progression. And yet when they went out there and annihilated Milwaukee on opening night, they went to Brooklyn, like, they made statements early on in the season. And it wasn't just like, oh, these games are super important. It was second night of a back-to-back going in and winning at Memphis. It's when this team was Kyle Lowry, Jimmy Butler, PJ Tucker, Markieff Morris, Bam Adebayo, like, not even including Victor Oladipo, you've already been able to see that this team knows what it can do. And so get to the finish line, get to it healthy. And then I also want to see what happens once you get all these guys back together. How quickly can you get back to that level? And you and I talked about this a bit last week. Like, if they're all back together in March, I think that gives you enough time to kind of coalesce and get that group together to where you've got the chemistry that you need going into the playoffs.
Clay, here's the deal, though, and this is interesting. The Heat lately have been building their record and winning in a completely different style than they did when they had Bam and when they had Jimmy playing and getting to the foul line. This is a three-point centric team right now, and we're seeing what they're doing right now with that 22 three. Let me try that again. 22 3-pointers.
Words are hard in the morning.
Yeah, it is, especially on the road. 22 3-pointers in the last game. This is a half-court team, basically, when you have Jimmy Butler getting to the foul line, when you have Bam operating from the elbow. Markieff Morris, we were all talking how he wasn't forcing three-pointers, and he was bringing this great mid-range game that we haven't seen from him really since his Washington Wizards tenure. So when you look at all of those things now, that's a completely different style. So do the Heat go back to that style, which was a winning style? Do the Heat stay with this style? Because all of a sudden we have this thing called Max Strus, and who knows, maybe even Kyle Guy stays around. So it's not only how are they going to put the rotation together, but it's also, to a degree, how are they going to play? I feel bad for all these scouts who sit on the side of Heat games and write down their flow charts and their plays and everything like that, because if you're scouting the Heat today, it's not going to be the same Heat as when you have Jimmy, as when you have Markieff, as when you have Bam. Can they mesh the styles together? Can Eric simply do this, snap the fingers? Now we're a 3-point team. Now we're going half court. I think that's going to be really interesting. And the fact that I could snap fingers twice this early in the morning, I'm pretty damn proud right now.
I'm impressed, man. That coordination is great. Good questions here. Really quickly before I get to these questions, my opinion, you go back to what you were doing early in the season, because I think there's a level of, for lack of a better word, luck and variable involved when
Sure.
you're strictly a 3-point shooting, or that's your primary way of scoring. You can have some games where you go in there. I want to talk about this Phoenix game coming up a little bit later on in the program, but you can have some games where you go in there and it's lights out and you're able to beat up on a team that I think roster for roster, when Jimmy Butler's not playing, Bam Adebayo's not playing, Phoenix is clearly a better team than Miami, but you're able to win games that way. But you're also going to lose some games that you had no business losing, just because it's a little bit more luck involved there. Clark asks, will they convert Caleb? Did they already do that? Give me an update on that. They have not done it yet.
And there's no rush to do that, Clay, for this reason. Two-way contracts no longer are limited to 50 days or 50 games on the active roster. Gotcha. So there's no reason. So after Caleb reaches 50 appearances on the active roster, he will then get paid at a full NBA pay rate. So we won't get screwed by not being converted. So they will keep him on the active roster every game. Clearly, he's one of their prime players. He'll get paid as long as by the last day of the regular season, they convert him. Right now, they have an open roster spot into a standard contract. He's playoff eligible. So he will be on the playoff roster. There's no rush for that. The real question will be this. If they add a +1, if they get a buyout player, I don't think it's going to be a John Wall, but if they add another buyout player, well, then they'd have to create a roster spot on the 15 standard roster for him. Do you ask UD, hey, it's a great ride. Let's face it, you're not going to play in the playoffs. God bless you. Can you seed your roster spot now? You can coach in the playoffs like Juwan, and we can get that extra spot. There's a lot of maneuvering going on. Again, we're getting close. February 10th is the NBA trading deadline. March 1 is the NBA buyout deadline. Mid-March is when the Heat have enough cap space to sign another player for the rest of the season. We're getting toward that progression. But like I wrote in my midseason report card, and I've been saying all along, I don't know if the Heat need to do any moves or get anyone else. They have so much right now, and I want to get into this with you, Clay, that when the Heat gets back to their regular roster, since you seem to agree they're going back to their regular style and their regular starting lineup, who plays and who doesn't play? Do we see Caleb Martin? Do we see Markieff Morris, or is that ship sailed?
Or Omer Yurtseven. And that's the third part of Clark's question too. So we'll get to that on the other side. We're up against a break really quickly, but as we go to break, second part of his question: will they create a roster spot to keep Kyle Guy based on what we've seen from him so far?
I would say no without injury for this reason. If you have the shooting of Max Strus, and if you have the shooting of Duncan Robinson, who's come around the last 2 games as a reserve, and if you have the shooting coming back of Gabe Vincent, you don't go out of your way and move things around and create scenarios for a 14th or 15th guy. And in that scenario, Kyle Guy wouldn't be a guy who would be anywhere close to sniffing the rotation. He would be out in what you call Akpala land, over there, Akpala Island. So I think even though I like what he's done, now, if the Heat know they're going to trade someone, and there might be a Duncan Robinson trade or a Max Strus trade, that's a different story. So we have to get inside the mind of Andy Ellisberg.
Yeah, and if we could do that, then we'd be making a lot more money than we are.
Or be off the air, one of the two, yeah.
Cedola loves your drapes behind you in your hotel room. That's beautiful behind you, Ira, the drapes.
It's like I'm staying in one of these old, I think they call them boutique hotels, so it's like you stay in these, basically means a lot of floral drapes and wallpaper, but it's also 2 blocks from the arena, so I'm not complaining.
All right, a lot more coming up on the other side of the break. We're going to talk about Dirk Nowitzki and where he fits in once we start to get some of these guys back. That, plus we're going to look ahead to these games, some great questions about that. That's all right here coming up next on Inside the Paint.